That.
have been saying, most of them is on the economic freedom of African countries, and to be specific, Zambia, its economic recovery path. What they would want this government to do, alternatives also not living more on the debt structuring process, as well as the IMF bailout package. The cost of living is something that many people are still concerned about. Joining me now is Joseph Silicho, who is a political analyst and PhD candidate, international politics and international relations at the University of Zambia. Good evening to you, Mr. Joseph Silicho. Now, to begin this conversation, I know that you're joining me via Zoom. Would like to get your view. Is Africa really free?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Of course, that's the broad question, whether Africa is free is not. But the first part would actually say Africa is free in terms of political independence. Our forefathers, their intention was to liberate the entire African continent from colonialism. Hence, the African Organization of African Unity was created in 1963 on 25th May. And this is the reason why we are celebrating Africa Freedom Day. And one of the achievements after its creation is end of colonialism. Most African countries, we have now about 55 or 54 in Africa, are liberated, as well as apartheid, which was very crucial in South Africa. It is no longer there. There is that unit now among the African continents. Then, on the other hand, we may not really say Africa is free. Freedom comes with means of how to get that freedom and access certain services. Economically, it is a question that leaves much to be desired. Poverty levels are still increasing in most African countries, including Zambia itself. Poverty specialist figures are there to show that despite various efforts, many countries are still have these poverty levels going high. But our modern governments are trying to ensure that these levels are reduced through industrialization strategy. For instance, in East Africa, I did a review of East African industrialization strategy. Many of them are moving in the right direction. For instance, Tanzania has taken the lead in the industrialization strategy as a result of countries coming together and reasoning together in Africa so that they use their own resources so that they have finished goods.
Now, Mr. Asilicho, I know you have touched on, poverty levels being high, but let's talk about, the influence of the West as well as East on this continent. What is, your take on the modern day scramble of Africa between the West and the East?
That's a very good question. After it hinges on what I've already said on the industrialization strategy. The idea to revert that is to ensure that all our minerals are processed within Africa so that we're able to export finished products that will have high value. We're talking about value addition. But if we continue just extraction industries like we do here in Zambia, copper, mining of copper, I think we're going to have a low tier. So to ensure that the West give us a better share, we need to engage in industrialization strategy. The scramble, the modern scramble actually is access to raw materials on the African continent because we don't have the means to produce to finish them into finished products. That will increase the exports. But however, the African Union has come up with the African Continental Free Trade Area that provide a bigger market where these finished goods can find their way and increase the income levels of our people and increase employment levels.
Now, debt trap is something that can be unavoidable as we talk about this Africa Day, which falls on May 25th, 2023 this year, which is an annual commemoration. By the way, I'm saying this because this is something that has affected many economies of countries in Africa. And just here in Zambia, we've heard, the president talking more on this, that we need to do with, the debt restructuring process. It has, to conclude if we are to talk about, a good economy. Our foreign, rather, do you think, the continent will ever, come out of, somewhat this debt trap?
That's another very good question. Debt management requires a lot of skills, but the first question we have to ask ourselves is what is causing this debt? Is it poor management by our leaders on the continent, or is it poor economic policies? If this debt trap is a result of poor economic policies, we have every reason to have good quality of leaders to be in power so that they come up with the right economic policies and reduce this debt. For instance, in Botswana, many years ago, it used to be a donor to World Bank because they manage their resources very well, like the diamonds and so on. So the reason for this debt is back again to export of raw materials that have no value, where not you have enough income, foreign exchange coming back to your country. If you're exporting finished product through industrialization strategy, Africa indeed can come out of this debt trap.
Mm. Still on, a debt structuring process, we've had quite a number of, concerns, especially here in our country, for leaders to provide, alternative or solutions, unlike relying on, what I can term as, talks surrounding this particular process, as well as the IMF, a bailout package. And I'm bringing you closer to home because this is what, currently is happening. Do you feel that, there's need for African leaders to look for other, solutions? In particular, I think Zambia, where now we have been talking, more on the debt structuring process, but without, providing alternatives. Should talks on this particular process delay further?
Well, I think we don't need to delay. I think restructuring is one of the solutions that to ensure that the scarce resources that we have are put into production. If we're able to produce more goods and export and have the income, the foreign exchange, we'll be able to pay the many debts in bits as agreed, and that way we'll be out of that debt trap. But if we cannot produce, we cannot have the industrialization strategy. So
We will talk more on this particular topic that we are looking at, that's Africa Freedom Day. What is at stake for the candidates? I know that our viewers are watching and they also want to participate. And to you, our viewers, the number is there on your screen. Feel free to render, your submission, contribution on this topic. This day will fall on the 25th of May 2023. It should be a Thursday. We'll have a day in between. And we continue interacting with Mr. Joseph Silicho, a political analyst. And later on, I'll also be joined by Mulondolozi Ndlovu, a Zimbabwean journalist and media researcher. But now, let's take a